Hey guys, if you don't know who I am, I'm Savia Rocks, and I help people tell their stories, stay inspired, and get educated as they find the pride of who they are within creativity, but most of all, without judgment. Join us as we talk about
You really want to leave a legacy, do something for mankind. Do something that's going to benefit not just your children, everyone else's children.
I think our job as humans is to become the person we were born and peel away the cultural stuff that was given to us, the trauma, like peel away the stuff that changed us or that was thrown on us or made us small or made us go off track.
The biggest thing I've always found is when people think they know so much, then they start knowing so little.
And I'm making the right choice, and I'm showing up for myself, and I'm showing up for what matters in life.
Sometimes I think that trauma doesn't always have to be a bad thing. I think trauma can help you make choices in your life that turn something that started bad into something beautiful. So guys, welcome to season 7 of the Us People podcast with Savia Rocks.
G'day, my name is Richmond Heath. I'm a physiotherapist and TRE trainer for Australia, and you're listening to Savia Rocks on the Us People podcast. And in this episode, we are going to talk about a paradigm-changing understanding and use of spontaneous shaking and trembling that we've largely all been overlooking and misunderstanding for years.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today I am humbled he's smiling. I like that. I have Richmond here with me, who is a somatic stress recovery educator, but also a TRE Australia founder, a physiotherapist, as he has told me. We've had a beautiful conversation now, and I really am so happy to have him on the show. Richmond, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Us People podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Savia. It's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Me too, definitely me too. So my first question for you is, could you tell me a bit about yourself, where you grew up, but also how that influenced you to be the person who you are today?
So I grew up in country Victoria in Australia on a farm. I was the youngest of 5 children. It was really quite an idyllic, in many ways, it seemed like an idyllic childhood. But went off to boarding school as a teenager, went to university, did a physiotherapy degree. Eventually had some relationships, eventually had a partner where we had a child, and really a big turning point for me was that I'd always felt like I was struggling to keep up with everyone else. So I was achieving, like I was very good at sport, I was very good at education. I did well in my physiotherapy degree. So on the outside of me, I looked like, a high-functioning person. And it wasn't until basically around my late 20s, my early 30s, my body started to break down. So I started getting chronic shoulder pain, chronic leg, ankle pain. So I couldn't run, I couldn't swim anymore, I couldn't do sport. I had 2 periods, Savia, of extreme low back pain where I had sciatic pain down my legs. Ironically, the second time it happened was when just after I arrived in London, and I was buying a pair of shoes, and I went down to tie my shoes over, and my back went bang, and then for a couple of months I couldn't even walk up and down stairs because my back pain and my leg was so sore. So I had this chronic pain, overwhelm, stress journey. But at that stage, because I was a physiotherapist, I was just trained that this was all mechanical stress and, it was muscle tension and that, but there was never any sense of what was creating the tension in my body. And the experience was I was really aware that my life and my body was grinding down to a halt. I remember actually ringing one of my brothers and saying, hey, I can't do all the sport and exercise I used to do to keep myself happy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the way I maintained my mental health and basically maintained my positivity. But there was this real sense that I just couldn't do the exercise that made me feel good and feel okay. And so then one of my other brothers got me to head off to a 10-day Vipassana silent meditation course where you just basically meditate into your body. And long story short, I did a few of those. And on my third one of those courses, what happened was as I was meditating and I got to a point where I wasn't forcing everything and I was just paying attention, observing my body started to spontaneously move itself.
Yes.
This was like this extraordinary experience. And it's not uncommon that people have this during meditation where it might vibrate, but my body started to rock forwards. And it was one of those moments where in life, just an extraordinary thing where I'm going, I'm not doing this movement. My body just started to move itself. And as I meditated, it would start to move and stretch. And it was just completely mind-blowing. Like I had no one had ever mentioned this. I've never heard of it. I've never seen anything. I wasn't the first person to experience it, but I just had no framework. So I snuck back into the hall late at night because during the meditation, you're not meant to move. And I'm like, but when I'm meditating and observing, my body's moving, I'm not moving. So I went back and I started to explore that and my whole body started to spin around and stretch. And I went from not being able to lift my arms above my shoulders because of my shoulder pain to within 2 or 3 days of exploring this spontaneous movement, I could do a handstand on one arm with my feet against the wall and I could push my whole body weight up and down with my arm, upside down. And it also felt incredibly ecstatic and pleasurable. So this was a turning point in my whole entire paradigm of life. And the way I look back and understand it now was I'd finally found like the emergency exit for the stress and tension that I'd carried my whole life.
Yes.
And so following that, it was just a complete, quantum leap paradigm shift. And I had no understanding or explanation within my Western medical physiotherapy model for explaining all this. It didn't make sense. So following that, number of years later, I was introduced to TRE or tension and trauma release exercises.
Yes.
And what that gave me then was a trauma-informed framework about what was happening. And it was only then that I started to understand stress and trauma and how it was in my life. And I recognized that I was someone who had been living with high-functioning anxiety my whole entire life, but I never realized it. I just thought I was having trouble keeping up with people. I sort of was aware that I was burning out or I had all these physical problems. I thought, my body's just, genetically more... it doesn't work very well or I'm weak. And so there was this whole sort of retrospective understanding that even from a young child, I'd been living with a huge amount of anxiety internally that even I wasn't aware of. So the reason I say that is that idyllic kind of, I thought I had a pretty idyllic childhood and in many ways I did, and I was very privileged and I had space and the farm and a loving, supportive family. But at the same time, I had all of these other unaware issues of stress and anxiety and hypersensitivity. My father probably lived, when I look back, with a lot of depression. My mother had anxiety, and not that I ever thought that. So there was all these undercurrents that I never really knew about. And for whatever reason, life sort of brought me to this breaking point where this spontaneous movement really awakened something in me that I had to then go and explore, and it's been, really the foundation of my work and my life ever since then.
The next question that I'm going to ask you kind of merges, and this is one of my favorite questions. So I'm going to ask you, Richmond, can you define yourself as a person, but also who do you see when you look in the mirror? There are many layers to this question, but on the flip side of that question, has there ever been a time where you have looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back at you? How did you feel? How did you manage to go from a person that you may have felt didn't have the purpose or perspective that you wanted to moving on in life and suddenly realizing you do have purpose, you do have perspective, you are somebody who you feel you can nurture and build up? When did that happened for you?
So it was a very specific moment because I had been someone my whole life that used to say constantly, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah.
And, I had lots of different jobs. I had lots of different relationships. I was moving around and I really didn't know what my calling or my vocation was.
Yes.
And that was a big stressor for me because I was always just sort of like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. At some point, there was a shift where I started asking a better question, which was like, what am I going to do with the next 12 months rather than what am I going to do with my life or what am I going to do when I grow up? But the fascinating thing, Savia, is so after I got introduced to TRE, which I didn't develop, but it was developed by a guy called David Berselli, an American traumatologist. And I'd been teaching Pilates full-time as a physio, so I was stopping that, and I brought David Berselli out to Australia, so I was introducing this TRE technique to Australia. And when he came, I was just so absorbed in absolutely everything that I was learning, everything that I was hearing. Like I could repeat word for word what he had said in the workshop the week before. I just came instantly alive. And I'll never forget that he came out for a couple of weeks, and at the end of a series of workshops, I was flying home to my family because I had a young child at that time, and so I wanted to get home and support my partner for a few days. And I was walking through the airport at Melbourne, and he was flying off, I think, to Sydney to wait for me there to do the next workshops the following weekend. And I was walking through the airport, and I'd left David. I'd arrived in Melbourne. I was walking through the gate lounge. I was going to pick up my bags, and I looked up, and there was this huge, massive sign advertising. I think it was IBM, the old sort of IBM computers in the early days. Yeah. This sign was about, I would say, 15 metres wide. It was a huge thing in the airport, and it had a picture of someone, and the words just said, "Have you had your career-defining moment yet?" And my entire life, that question, up until that point, I would have collapsed. I would have just instantly fallen into, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Life's too hard. I haven't got purpose. And I'll never forget the feeling is when I saw that instantly, before even thinking it, my chest sort of opened up. I was swelled with this sense of like strength and positivity. And it was just, my body was just like, yes, I have just had this sort of career-defining moment. Now, I didn't know where exactly that was going to go, but I knew that this process that I'd been introduced to first through the Vipassana 5 or 6 years ago, that spontaneous movement, and then getting this framework of TRE, there was just, it was like, that was the time that I was like, right, now I've got a sense of my purpose and what I'm learning, this is 15 years later, even more so is my value. And by that, what I mean is my value of service to other people, rather than it being about I'm valuable and I need to feel valuable so I feel valuable. Much more this sense of like, where can I be of value? Where can I be of service to others? And certainly having purpose. I'm involved in a lot of men's work over 20 years. And, this sense of service and purpose has been really life defining for me.
See, that's what I like, stories that have meanings. And we're only the second question in. And see, this is why I like asking these questions, because it helps people to understand the depth of who you are and what you've been through. So my next question for me is, I would love to get more into what you do. You kindly showed me a video to help educate myself on what you do, but for people who may not understand your profession of what you do, I would love for you to break it down for me and also for the listeners, for them to understand a more in-depth version of what you do and why you do it.
Yeah. So, look, TRE, which was originally sort of called TRE for trauma release exercises, now it's sometimes called tension and trauma release exercises. At its core is a way of understanding spontaneous shaking and trembling in the human body as a positive recovery response. So TRE is like a modern Western neuroscientific sort of medical trauma-informed model of this shaking response. And what we do is use muscle fatigue and a simple exercise to help people deliberately invoke this shaking response in their body. Now, for a lot of the listeners, we will instantly be saying, why would I want to invoke shaking? Because in westernized cultures, that shaking has been seen as a symptom of stress or anxiety or shock or post-traumatic stress, or even seen as a panic attack. But a lot of traditional societies for millennia have been aware and deliberately using this shaking and trembling response because they're aware that it's not actually part of our body being stressed or panicking. It's how our body releases that stress and tension or that shock response. So a key part of the work is simply educating people that this shaking response that, we've all experienced or seen. So, as a little child speaking at school, your hands start to shake, but we all just then suppress it and hold it in because we think, oh my God, I'm anxious, I'm scared, I don't want anyone to know I'm scared. Or maybe, we've had a shock or a fright, like a car accident, or we've seen someone after a car accident shaking, and we've all been told that is shock. We've got to stop that, get a warm blanket, calm them down. So we've misunderstood it. And even in the sort of sports and exercise field, if you're at Pilates or you're at yoga or you're at the gym and you're doing a position or an exercise or a movement and your body starts to shake, we've all just been told that's weakness. And so a key part of what we're doing in TRE is letting people know that that shaking is not part of the fight or flight response. It's not helping our body to fight or flee. It's not part of helping the body to freeze and immobilize and contain movement, which is the trauma response. It's actually how the body releases that stress and tension. So we need to help people destigmatize, understand and reframe that this is something which is this shaking reflex is in every single human person on the planet. And one of the beauties, Savia, is that it bypasses our culture or our belief systems, our religion, our ethnicity, our sexual preferences, our genders. It's a human phenomenon that has evolved in mammals and us as mammals. So this is an innate sort of recovery relaxation resource that, again, in Western culture, it's just been pathologized and overlooked. So one of the beauties about TRE is that we use a simple exercise and muscle fatigue, and you saw in the video lying on the ground with lifting the knees up. So we're just using the muscles, and you can use any muscle group and any position, but we tend to just use the lying on the floor in like a butterfly position. And because we use muscle fatigue, we bypass the cognitive thinking mind in terms of accessing this deep reflex in the body. So what it means is it doesn't become so much of a therapy session. You don't need to recall anything. You don't need to talk about anything because these deep patterns of stress and tension and trauma are, below our conscious mind, these deeper patterns. And it was developed by David Berceli because in places of mass-scale trauma, natural disasters, war zones, civil wars, and we're seeing this more and more and more with natural disasters spreading, around the world because of climate change and all the sort of weird things happening with the weather. One of David's key points was the Western therapy model, while it has value and is, it has benefit, it doesn't work very well in situations where you've got 200,000 people affected by the tsunami, for example, or you've had, we can't go, we need to have 15 psychology sessions with 50,000 people. And so part of the magic that David was bringing through to the world through the TRE model was that by teaching people about this positive use of this recovery shaking reflex, and then empowering them with a way where every single person can learn to access or connect with this shaking response within about 1 or 2 minutes, and then learn how to regulate it so you can stop it, start it, so you're not out of control, it all feels comfortable. then we can empower people in their own journey of healing and growth. Again, not to discount the value of therapy or doing any, body work or breath work or mindfulness or meditation, but it's like reconnecting people with this, what should be birthright information, that we understand this is a positive resource to help to optimize our health and our well-being, that again, we've just been completely overlooking. So in a nutshell, we just use an exercise to deliberately invoke the shaking and trembling response. And you can see video, and if you look up TRE anywhere online, you'll see lots of videos. And then we teach people how to regulate it so they can control it when it comes on and when it comes off. And then what that means is people have a free, lifelong resource that they can then use whenever and wherever they need. And one of the beautiful things about it, and part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it, Savia, is not just that it's empowering, is that when we are most stressed, okay, when we're most exhausted, is when we are least likely to do self-care.
That is true.
Because, if you've just done 14 hours on the computer at work for some project, the last thing you want to probably do is meditate because you've been using your mind. You just want to switch off. Or if you've been fighting a bushfire, fighting wildfires, and you've done 5 back-to-back shifts, the last thing you think is, I'm going to go and do yoga, because you're exhausted. Or if you are looking after the children, and you've had days and days and nights of no sleep, generally the last thing we're going to do is, I'm going to go and do something. And the beautiful thing about this mechanism is it's not something we have to do, because the body generates the spontaneous shaking and trembling itself. So all we do is lie down and let go. We switch off. You can be lying in bed. You can be lying in the floor. You can do it anywhere. You could be on your own. You could be with your family. You could be with a group of people who've just survived a flood. You could do it with your work colleagues. You can do it with sports teams, just lying down on the floor, and it doesn't take any mental focus. It doesn't take any physical effort. There is just this experience of the body sort of relaxing and reorganizing us.
See, this is why I like this. So many people don't understand, which leads to my next question as well. So many people don't understand, and I know we've spoken about this even before we started the podcast, Richmond. So many people don't understand where their trauma comes from, why they are shaking in the first place, why it affects also mental health and well-being for them. I would love for you to talk a little bit or touch on it. I really would be humbled for you to talk about why people feel the trembling in their hands, as we spoke about the trembling in the body. And a lot of the time it can come from, as you say, one of the top ones, anxiety, which a lot of people still don't understand why they are getting anxiety, or why the anxiety has come, where the anxiety has come from, but also how to treat the anxiety that you have. So even if you do have the anxiety, is teaching yourself methods to be able to understand why you have anxiety, the methods of how to treat anxiety, and understand what anxiety is. I know I'm throwing a lot at you at the moment.
Yeah, that's okay. So let's break it into a few different sections. So the first thing I want people to think about is anyone who's ever had a dog. Okay, dogs shake themselves multiple times a day.
Yes.
And there's fascinating research that shows that when a dog does that little shake for 2 or 3 seconds,
yes,
what it does is it changes the direction that their heart rate is moving in. So when they shake, their heart rate is going up, they're getting stressed. They do a 2-second shake and the heart rate changes direction, and then it starts to calm down.
Yes.
Now, the other animal, people who've got cats, where cats purr and there's this natural vibrating that happens regularly.
Yes.
The reason I'm mentioning this is that this shaking reflex is something that is meant to be a natural part of our human body's homeostatic rebalancing processes on a regular basis, okay?
Yes.
Now, when we are children, we tend to shake more freely.
Yeah.
And the way that most of us release and our bodies release stress and tension is through crying or sometimes laughing. But our diaphragm and our breath, when it holds tension, when we get stressed and it tightens up, the way the diaphragm releases and relaxes itself and spontaneously shakes and tremors is through laughter and crying. This is why, as little children, we cry freely. I mean, we call it crying, but really it's a spontaneous movement to relax the tension in the system and bring us back to balance. But generally, we lose that, or we contain that, or we inhibit that sense of free-flowing laughter and crying. So the reason I'm saying this is, rather than thinking the shaking is just about treating a pathology, like I've got anxiety, so I have to treat that, that's absolutely valuable. What I'm really wanting to make clear to everyone is that as a physical human organism, an animal sort of body, we are designed and have evolved that this shaking response should be occurring naturally whenever our body needs to rebalance itself or relax itself. So it's most often when we're stressed and anxious.
Yeah.
And we talk about when people are shaking, they say, I'm having a panic attack. Whereas I like to just say, look, stop calling it a panic attack. You have had a moment of panic, but the shaking is the panic discharge. By the time you're shaking, the panic is already over. It's your body trying to restore itself, okay? And so that's a common one when we're stressed and anxious. That's where most of us, or we've had a trauma or a shock, that's where most of us have this spontaneous shaking. But we also see it when we get super excited.
Yes.
There's so much charge. The body starts to vibrate with excitement. We also see it when we get super angry. So, with like this internal tremor. So anytime there's like more energy and intensity in the body and adrenaline flowing through the body than is optimal, the body invokes the shaking to get itself back, to reduce the adrenaline, use up the adrenaline, and get the nervous system back to a calm state. Because most people think adrenaline makes my hands shake. Whereas I like to explain to people, adrenaline doesn't make your hand shake. Adrenaline gives your body a huge amount of energy for movement, traditionally the fight or flight response. But if we are not fighting or fleeing, there's too much energy in the system. Like if you've got too much electricity going through a I don't know, some sort of electrical device, it will start to shake and vibrate. It's got to get rid of some of that energy to get back to a state. So anytime there's more energy moving through the body's going to shake. So the adrenaline doesn't make the body shake.
Yeah.
It gives the body the energy to run and fight and flee and move. But if we're not fighting or fleeing or running or moving, then the body says we need to get the adrenaline levels back up. And the way that it uses up the adrenaline to get it back to a balanced state is it creates this little micro shaking.
Yes.
Because it's much more efficient and effective than acting out. I've got to go and run, or I have to go to the gym, or I've got to punch my bag for half an hour. The mammalian body, like a zebra shaking at the waterhole after getting away from a lion, has developed this much more efficient way to use up the adrenaline. So I know it's a subtle little semantic difference, but it's this sense of, we think, adrenaline is making me shake, rather than going, no, the shaking is helping me get rid of the adrenaline.
Yes.
So my point being is that this is a natural thing that as humans, when we're little children, we laugh and we cry. We shake and we tremble, and we shut this down. And there's a wonderful story, David Berceli, it was a key aha moment for him. Was he was working in a country in Africa, I can't remember which country it was, but it was involved in a civil war.
Yes.
And so they would often have aeroplanes coming and dropping bombs. And so he said there was one day where he was in this village and the air siren went off. They all went into the bomb shelter as these planes were getting closer, he said, and the bombs were hitting the ground. He said the whole place was terrifying. The ground would shake and there was noise. And what he noticed was, as he was looking around the room, all the little babies and the little children were crying, but they were shaking. And then he noticed that the teenagers were shaking a little bit, but not much. And then when he looked around at all the adults, he noticed that none of the adults were shaking. And afterwards, when he survived, and they all survived, he said to one of the adults, "Do you ever shake when the bombs are coming?" And that person said to him, "No, we don't want the children to know that we're scared." And that was this little magic aha moment for him, where he recognized that this shaking response was something natural in us that we learn to suppress and inhibit and contain. And the whole medical model has misunderstood it. If you go to your psychologist and say, "Hey, I've just come back from a war zone and I'm shaking," they'll say, "Oh, that's a symptom of PTSD. Here's some medication to stop that."
Yeah.
Or if you say, "When I go into a social setting, my body starts to shake," the psychology model will say, "Oh, that's a symptom of social anxiety. We need to stop that. We need to calm that down." Now, yes, that's true. It's associated with social anxiety, but it's not a part of being anxious. It's the body coping and recovering from being anxious. So my point here is that this shaking response is not just something we need to use because we've got a mental health condition or we've got anxiety or we've got whatever, or we've got chronic stress and tension in the body. It's something that as mammals, our bodies are wanting to do and use on a regular basis. And all we're doing with TRE is deliberately invoking it so that we can reawaken that natural kind of impulse.
One of the questions I do want to ask you is the word somatic. A lot of people will hear it, for example, and not understand the meaning behind it. So I would just like you to break that down for them.
Yeah. So at the most simple level, somatic is kind of just a word to describe our neuromuscular system, our physical structure, our muscles, our bones, basically our body. And it's often used to describe the whole sort of structure of the body and the muscular system beyond just the nervous system. So there's a lot of focus on the nervous system these days in the stress and trauma world, which is fantastic. But because in Western, again, I'm only coming from a Western model here, the traditional split between the mind and the body, the difference between mental health professionals and, physiotherapists or body-based professionals, that split ever since the time of Descartes and separating the mind and the body is that now the nervous system has become a huge focus for mental health and well-being, which is great. But the movement system and the muscular system is still it's just starting to creep into the field of, and this is why I would say the somatic system. It's like the movement system, the muscles of the body. This is really important because what most people don't understand, and we haven't been trained, is that all of our stress and trauma responses are first and foremost about movement. All right. So when we get stressed, if I'm feeling anxious, that doesn't help me do anything. But if I'm feeling the movements of the flight response to run away, that's what's being generated first. So we often think, my stress response is about the emotions or about my thinking, but it's not. It's about the movement response, where fight and flight is about the body generating more movement, all completely instinctual, unconscious. I'm not choosing to run. It's like my body is just generating the fight or flight response. So it's about more movement. And that's a stress response. And the difference between stress and trauma, when we look at it from the position of the body, Savia, is that when we go into a trauma response, then the body immobilizes itself. It contains movement. All right. So like we would call it the freeze response in trauma, or the fold or the flop response when we fall completely unconscious or dissociate. So because stress and trauma has traditionally been looked at psychologically or behaviorally, what's being missed is that before we even feel any emotion in a trauma or stress or trauma response, the body is already generating its movement response first. There was a great a great model was given by, I can't remember the person's name, but he was one of the early developers of understanding the brain. And the way he described it, he says it happens in this order, and it's at a microsecond level. But he says the first thing that happens is my body starts running away.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that happens is I become aware that I'm feeling fear. So the emotion comes afterwards, split second, but comes afterwards. And the last thing is my conscious mind is going, why am I running? Why am I frightened? It's looking around the world for a cause, and it says, oh, it's because of the bear. So we all tend to think, I see the bear, I feel scared, and I run away. But that's not how our instincts and our stress and trauma responses work. It's the complete opposite. The body responds before we're even consciously aware of it. And this is why in our normal medical models, most of us are like, we've got to change the way we think. We've got to talk about stress and trauma, and it's a cognitive process, but our stress and trauma response is not a cognitive process. It's firstly a body-based one. Now, of course, we can influence it to a certain degree, but the beauty of working with this shaking mechanism and reawakening it and using it deliberately is that shaking process is organized by the same part of the nervous system and the brain and the somatic system, which is all unconscious. It's being generated, this shaking response, in the same part of the brain that's generating the stress and trauma responses.
Yes.
And this has been a missing link in the Western models of dealing with stress and trauma, is we tend to do everything cognitively or behaviorally and consciously, and we're choosing what to do. And that has huge value. We know that. But we also know that the current Western medical treatments for post-traumatic stress are only fully effective 1/3 of the time.
See?
Another 1/3 of the time people will get some help, and 1/3 of people will not get any benefit whatsoever, people with post-traumatic stress, from our existing models. So this is this missing link that in traditional cultures, they have not missed this. So here's a few examples. The Kalahari Bushmen, who live in sort of northern South Africa and a few other countries around there, part of their cultural identity is they call themselves the keepers of the shake. And they deliberately invoke this shaking response as part of their cultural healing and well-being and spirituality. They'll often get up in the middle of the night as a community and people will shake and tremble. They have a completely different interpretation than, this is a trauma release process. If you look in ancient Eastern cultures, so the samurai warriors. So when we think about samurai warriors, they were famous for being superhuman. Like, we make films about them jumping onto the roof, doing things that humans seemingly can't do. One of the key secrets to their seemingly superhuman powers was they practiced something called Seiki Jutsu, where they would meditate to the point where their body would start to spontaneously move and shake itself. There's another process called Katsujun Undo in Japan, which basically means regenerative movement. In Native American cultures, there was the shaking shaman or the shaking tent, the same in the Caribbean. So there's all these traditional cultures that have recognized that this spontaneous movement is not something wrong or bad, but in the Western model, we have pathologized it completely. So we've not only just overlooked it, but we've said this is wrong and bad, and we've been missing out on gaining the benefits from this natural response that's, again, it's not just something we're meant to use when we're traumatized. It's meant to be a natural part of our human experience, on a day-to-day basis. And I know I'm going on, but there's one other thing that you originally mentioned in the question.
Yeah.
And this is about the origins of our trauma.
Yes.
So even just looking at it from a scientific viewpoint, our brainstem and our limbic system, that part of our nervous system and our autonomic nervous system and our somatic system that responds to stress and trauma and generates the stress and trauma response, that's fully developed in the second trimester when we are in utero. So before we are born, our stress and trauma responses at an unconscious level are already fully developed.
Yes.
The reason I'm saying this is when we start going into talking about it, and there's don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's not value in talking about things that we're consciously aware of. Like, I went through a flood, I had this experience, I had this trauma. That's absolutely relevant. But everything before we are 3 or 4 years old, or whatever we can consciously remember, we are never going to have a story for. It's just going to be a pattern of stress and tension in our nervous system. And in our conversation, before we jumped on the call, the listeners haven't heard this, but we were talking about intergenerational trauma.
Yes.
These patterns that get passed down. There was great research, sadly enough, showing that women who were pregnant during the Twin Tower disaster on 9/11 in America, the children of those mothers had massively increased levels of cortisol in their life and effectively post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Now, when there are causes of stress and tension and trauma in our lives and patterns that we can't consciously remember, this is the limit of doing our trauma therapy or our stress relief consciously and cognitively, because we are limited in what we can access.
Yes, that's true.
And it's, again, this is not to discount the value of those things we're doing, but to say this is a little missing piece of the puzzle where we want to be able to work with our deep unconscious and our physical body and the patterns in our somatic movement system, and recognizing that our body, our human body, has evolved, genetically encoded in us, is an unconscious reflexive process to help us resolve and let go of those tension and trauma patterns. And that's what the shaking and the trembling is.
For people who are going through it for the first time, that can be traumatic for them also. And I would like you to give some methods or some opinions on how you feel you could help people who are going through their own stress and want to understand different stress levels of why they're going through what they're going through. Because as we all know, work can be stressful. Even if you're doing something that you love in your life, love can be stressful. But for anyone who is going through a stressful time within their life, and sometimes it's actually mental stress rather than the physical stress itself. Mental can play a huge part just as much as the physical, Richmond. In your opinion, do you have any methods of being able to help people that they can use to be able to... I'm not saying stress is going to go away straight away, because everything in life takes time and a process. But just in your opinion, any methods that you feel would help people?
So, for me personally, and the things that I use myself and recommend. So mindfulness and meditation is obviously, super, super valuable.
Yeah.
Breathing techniques and breathwork, and not necessarily having to be like the big hyperventilation. Let's breathe, let's hyperventilate for 30 minutes and have a huge, big altering experience. But learning to train the breath, even simply breathing through the nose rather than the mouth. Learning, box breathing or 6-4 breathing, or learning breathing patterns to consciously, calm down. Exercise, hugely shown that it's as effective in mild to moderate depression. Exercise is as effective as using pharmaceutical drugs. Having relational space and having a community and being supported, incredibly valuable. And the fifth one I would say there is having purpose, which we touched on earlier.
Yes.
That moving beyond just focusing on ourselves and only ourselves, and I've got stress and I've got to fix myself, that's a critical thing, is this sense of having purpose and meaning and being of value to others. And there's a wonderful book called, I think it's called Lost Horizons by Johan Hari. I can't remember. That might not be the name of it. Anyway, Johan Hari, Hari. He's a beautiful writer, and he wrote a whole book about depression and how we understand depression. And there was a fantastic study that he referenced in that book, where there was a worldwide study conducted with people in many different countries around the world who were looking to do something for themselves to make themselves happier. Yeah. So, they were stressed, they were depressed, they were whatever, and they were going to do something to make themselves happier. And they found these fascinating results that in some countries, the people who deliberately did things to make themselves happier, they actually got happier. And in other countries, the people who were doing things to make themselves happier did not get happier. And they were like, this is fascinating. What was different? What was the difference? Basically, what it turned out is, and for example, America was a country where, and the more westernized countries were the countries that people weren't getting happier, because in those situations, people lived in a culture that was much more individualistic. And so when people were doing things to make themselves happier, they were focused on themselves. I'm going to go and get my massage. I'm going to buy myself something new. I'm going to get my hair done. I'm going to go, whatever, buy myself a new motorbike. Whatever it was, people were trying to please themselves. And basically what they found was it did not work.
Yes.
In the other countries where people were getting happier when they were making a deliberate effort to get happier and be less stressed, those people, when they were trying to get happier, they were going and doing things for other people.
Service, giving a service.
They were doing service. And in our, sort of, not corporate, what's the word, consumer culture, that's sort of the American dream and that westernized sort of capitalistic model where it's like about what I get and how happy I can be. There's a short-term fix. You get a little bit of dopamine and you get that little rush of, I've got this new toy or I've got this. But what it was showing was that it's not the answer towards managing stress. So I always, in my workshops, when I'm teaching TRE, I always frame this up to people as say, look, if you're doing this tremoring process because you just want to feel better for your own benefit, it's probably going to help, but it's not going to give you the sort of life you want to live. Whereas if you're using it to regulate your system so you can have value and purpose in the world and meaning and relationships and connection, that's a very critical difference. So there's some of the things, but what I would say to all the listeners is my number one go-to, of course, is to learn how to access this neurogenic or spontaneous shaking reflex, because when people do it, Savia, because the body is able to relax itself far more than I can ever do consciously, a really common experience is people, when they've done the shaking for the first time, is they'll get up and say something like, I feel like I've been meditating for 3 hours, because the shaking movements calm the nervous system. And when the nervous system calms down, we naturally have a more calm and relaxed mind. It's as simple as think about when you have a child or a baby. If a baby's crying, we don't hold it still, we rock it. The rocking movements are naturally soothing, okay? So, again, this is why I'm passionate about people can learn how to reframe this shaking response. They can learn how to invoke it. Within 1 minute, people can start to feel this shaking and vibration. And as TRE, part of the value is learning, hey, I can let it happen, but I can turn it off. So I'm in control of the letting go of control. So it feels completely safe, completely comfortable, accessible and easy. As I say, you can do it lying in bed. So that's why I'm so passionate about TRE. All these other things are incredibly valuable, but the limit, for example, of mindfulness is I can only ever consciously relax the parts of myself that I've got conscious control over.
That's true.
All right. I can only ever go to Pilates and yoga. I can only ever stretch and let go of the tension that I have conscious control over. And that's a tiny portion, like the traditional iceberg model. That's a tiny portion of our physical body. Some people estimate we've only got control over about 5 to 10% of our physical body. By accessing the body's ability to release stress and tension, now we're tapping into this other 90% of the organism, which can rebalance itself in ways that we can never do consciously. So adding those together gives us like a turbocharged way of reducing stress and trauma. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer to say anyone who's going, I'm dealing with some stress, I'm dealing with some trauma, or even I want to feel healthier and more alive, learning how to use this TRE. So learning TRE is one, and I just want to be clear, TRE is one method and one model for using it. In my opinion, it's the most empowering and the easiest way of accessing this shaking that I've seen, but there's lots of other techniques around the world. And one of the positives that came out of COVID-19, Savia, because this is the podcast here where we're about positivity, was one of the positive things that came out was that up until COVID-19, because TRE was evolving in sort of a lot of the trauma therapy world, it was seen as like a therapy. You need to come and see me. I need to be with you to teach you how to do it, to keep you safe. Now, during COVID, we couldn't often do that. And so we discovered that we could very comfortably teach people TRE online via Zoom, like in a live Zoom call. Now, for me, I was very aware that that's great, but it still requires that, I've got to be there because I have to teach you how to do it. But during COVID, and I lived just out of Melbourne, Australia, and we were the most locked down city in all of the world. We had the longest lockdowns for the most period of time and the biggest restrictions, where we're only allowed to go outside for half an hour a day within like a 1 or 2 kilometre radius. So what that meant was that I lost all my ability to travel around Australia and run workshops, and lost my ability to earn an income. Now, in Australia, I was extremely blessed because our government had a sort of support social welfare system where people like myself could get access to some funding. So during that time, while I wasn't working, but my partner at the time was working in a nursing home, she was working incredibly hard, I really wanted to go, look, I'm being supported by the government and the taxpayer. I want to give something back. I want to do something with this. I don't want to just sort of, suck the welfare money. And so what I did was I created an online TRE course, and it was the first of its kind in the world. And at the time, a lot of the TRE therapists were like, oh no, you have to have someone with you to learn. This is not safe. And I knew that this was going to be able to be done very safely. And what I'm really happy to say is since that COVID time, there's been more than 14,000 people from countries all around the world who, following this little online course that I built that has like 3 guided TRE sessions. So you get guided how to invoke the tremors, how to control them, and a bit of background theory about stress and trauma and where the tremors fit in. So there's been more than 14,000 people who have gone through that course. And in that first 3 or 4 years, there was not one person who had any worries about feeling overwhelmed or concerned or scared. And it does have a screening tool built in. So if you do feel nervous, you're helped to go and learn with a TRE provider. But the reason I'm saying this was one of the positives that came out of COVID was that the model of TRE evolved to say, no, the vast majority of people can learn this process online for the cost of less than a single therapy session, and then they've got this process within themselves for the rest of their life. And so that's something that started to evolve. And again, this is why I'm so passionate about educating and empowering people. I don't want people to have to come and see me and say, hey, I'm the one who's got the keys to your healing and your freedom. It's saying this process is inside you. And David Berceli, when he developed it, this was the primary focus of TRE was about empowering people rather than making them dependent. And so following on from COVID now, people are starting to learn TRE online. So if you've got access to the internet, you can get access to, reawakening this natural response, which is in every single human.
I wanted to ask you more about the scientific side of TRE as well, because I know people will understand the methods of TR, doing the methods that you have, but also I wanted people to understand the science of it, because people are going to have a scientific perspective on TRE and educating them on that. I would love to hear your perspective on this also.
And this is one of the values of TRE, is because it has a scientific model that explains where this shaking and trembling reflex fits in. And the foundations of that are around the polyvagal theory. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let me explain it like this. Most of us have been taught that in our nervous system, we have a sympathetic nervous system, and a parasympathetic nervous system. Now, it took me years to remember which one, but I always think of para is like a parachute, okay? So the parasympathetic system is slowing us down. And the old model of our nervous system is we had fight and flight, sympathetic system, and rest and digest, which was like going to sleep. Whereas the latest neuroscience has shown that we actually have our nervous system is more ordered into 3 different sections. And polyvagal, the vagus nerve, which is the biggest parasympathetic calming nerve in the body. It's called vagus because I think it's Greek or Latin for the wanderer, because it goes to all the organs in the body, the viscera, the stomach, the heart, the lungs, linked in also through networks into the face. So that what it means is that we have these 3 different states of our nervous system, effectively. We've got the calm and relaxed state. Then we've got the fight and flight or the high arousal state. And then after that, we've got this freeze or fold state, which creates low energy. It's the true trauma response where the body shuts down in order to survive stress and trauma. We get chronic tension, literally the freeze response, like we turn to rock and stone. It's in a lot of childhood books where, the evil witch looks at someone or the ice queen looks and they freeze and they turn into stone.
Yeah.
So the science is reflecting what we experience as humans. Now, the process of going into fight and flight and the freeze response is really well studied, and we know that they go in that order. And what hasn't yet been well studied is how the body comes out of those stress and trauma responses. Mm-hmm. And when we recognize that the freeze response is first and foremost about containing movement, either that I'm not moving. I'll give you an example. Is if someone walks through the door, and I'm stressed and I don't know who they are, I don't immediately run over and smash them and try and fight them, or I don't jump out the window. Our body says, first of all, when we're stressed, it's like, can we stay calm? Again, this is all completely unconscious. So I'm calm. Excuse me, how are you going? We're going to use our human communication skills to express calmness by our body staying calm, so we're not creating any threat for the other person. So that's our first protective response, is like, let's see if we can stay calm and negotiate. If that doesn't work, then we move into fight or flight. The brakes come off. Our body's full of adrenaline and we are ready to fight or flee for our life. Okay, so you can imagine that's a high energy state. But if you imagine I start running towards that person and they pull out a gun, if I keep running to them, it's going to make the situation worse. So my body then has to contain the urge to fight or flee. And so the system shuts itself down. But you can imagine in that system, in that example, it doesn't mean that inside I'm calm and relaxed. No, I'm absolutely terrified, but something has to contain that. So it's like the accelerator in the car is fully on, and then the emergency brake comes in over the top of it and stops us moving.
Yes.
So in those traumatized, frozen, immobilized states, we look calm and relaxed, but internally we're not. What's also important is in those states where we're in fight and flight, we get adrenaline. We feel alive. We're triggered. We feel so alive and vital. But then when we go into the freeze response, we get filled with endorphins. So we're not feeling the stress and tension inside us. We're not feeling our anxiety or terror or fear, and we're not feeling what's happening in the body. Now, that's a wonderful evolutionary gift, so that if I'm being eaten to death by the proverbial saber-toothed tiger, I'm not going to feel it. So at the point of traumatic, that's why you can have a traumatic experience. Someone cuts themselves, they don't feel any pain until afterwards.
Shock.
We get flooded. So part of our response to trauma is innately we are designed to disconnect from ourselves so we don't feel it. That's the definition. It's overwhelming. We don't want to feel it. We don't want to be aware of it. Now, that process is very well researched and very well known, and we all know it's completely unconscious. We're not choosing to feel hopeless or helpless. That is a state that the nervous system is generating. All right? You imagine, back to that example. If I'm in a room being held hostage and someone's got a gun, if I start to think, wow, I can fight this person, if I mobilize, I'm probably going to end up dead. And so part of the emotional, psycho-emotional experience in that moment is going, I feel hopeless and collapsed. There's nothing I can do. That's not because I've got a negative mindset. It's not just because I'm thinking negatively. It's because my body is generating a response inside my system of do not do anything. Do not try to have hope. Do not try to take action. It's dangerous. And so the nervous system is creating a state of there's nothing we can do, don't do anything. And the last thing that happens is consciously, emotionally, I'm feeling hopeless and helpless. All right. Now, that's very obvious in that setting if there's someone with a danger and a gun. But what happens is a lot of us live our lives like that because the ability to deal with life or find a job or maintain things, maintain your income or keep up with the world, it's often so overwhelming. Climate change, if that worries, it's like, I can't fix climate change. There's often so much overwhelm that when we experience hopeless and helplessness in our thinking or negative thinking, or I can't do it, it's not going to work, we tend to think it's a problem with our thinking rather than recognizing that that is just showing us the state that our nervous system is. It's in a survival state, which is saying the best we can do is survive. We can't do anything. Now, hopefully you've been able to follow, as listeners, you've been able to follow. It's like these 3 stages of the nervous system activating. But this is where, when we recognize the trauma response of immobility or the collapse response where there's nothing I could do, it could be I'm having a great day and then all of a sudden my father's on the phone and my body, all my energy's gone. So it doesn't even have to be about trauma, life and death externally. It's about what's happening in the nervous system. And the example in my own life, Savia, is when I was a young boy at primary school, there was a boy in my class who was, we were like 5 or 6, 7 years old. He was already 6 foot tall. And these days we would say that he had extremely violent Asperger's. But at those days we didn't really know. But he was prone to just having violent outbursts completely out of the blue for no particular reason. Like I saw him punch people while we were playing sport. Someone who just he was running along with the ball and the kid tried to stop him and he just punched him and kept running. The reason I'm saying this is being in a classroom with that boy as a young child, I didn't know any of this, but I was scared and I was nervous because it was unpredictable and I didn't know whether he could be violent. He wasn't ever violent towards me, but I never knew. It was many years later that I found out I was moved school by my parents in grade 3 because I kind of wasn't coping and wasn't doing so well at that school. But the reason I'm sharing this is if someone else is being violent in a classroom, we wouldn't go, oh, that's trauma. We'd just go, oh, that kid's got some behavioural problems. But to our nervous system, all of that time, every time I was in a room with that child, my nervous system was hypervigilantly waiting for, is something going to go wrong? But I'm not allowed to leave school, am I? I'm not allowed to run away. So my body has to contain that. So there's this learnt sense of the body's freezing and containing itself. The reason I'm sharing that example is in these conversations, people often think about trauma as capital T life and death trauma, which obviously people have those experiences. But what I like to help people understand is that we all have these experiences where our nervous system immobilizes us and contains movement, expression, emotional awareness, action and behavior. So this is why I think it's so valuable to stop thinking about trauma as what happened externally and to stop thinking about trauma as only being to do with life and death, but to start to look at this concept that whenever my body immobilizes itself, shuts it down, contains itself, disconnects me from my awareness, effectively that's a trauma state.
It's really interesting that you say that.
And the last piece of this is that recognizing in TRE we have, and a lot of models, is we have what we call a polyvagal curve. So there's been a lot of scientific research into how the body goes into stress and trauma. We absolutely know that. But there hasn't been much research into how the body comes out of stress and trauma, because the way the body comes out of it, the way it releases the immobility response is to start to mobilize. It does it unconsciously. It's shaking and trembling.
But
in
why
our
do we
West,
as humans, Rich? Sorry to jump
you're
in, but how do our okay? We're going through the trauma, and
Yep.
I know we've spoken a bit about us as humans stopping it because we don't want to show people that we're scared.
Yep.
Now, say if we're trying to understand it, but we still are trying to stop it. How does that work? Because at the same time, I don't know if it's humans can be very complicated.
well, we are.
Right, so it's many different things, and we can go on and talk about this for hours. I know I can with you because I'm so intrigued by it myself. So a human, like you said previously when you were talking about the bombs dropping and the adults, you know, not wanting to show the fear to the children, but yet the children themselves were shaken, so they were shaking the trauma out of themselves, which is actually a better method.
Absolutely.
You know? But I find that when we're in our child state and we get older, and then we decide, okay, we're in between, so we might be teenagers or so on and so forth, and we still shake because we're still afraid of things, and we'll show that shaking. And then when we get to adulthood, I've always wanted to understand, where is that cutoff point between being a child, for example, and being your true self? Because children are phenomenal because they just say it how it is, and they act how it is, and they cry when they need to. But then there's the adult point where we change ourselves, or because of society, or because of what we see in the streets, or because of what our parents teach us, or family members that look after us, we ourselves, Richmond, change. We change. So when we change, our whole perspectives of, I don't want to show people that I am scared, out of pride, or out of embarrassment or ego, all of these things goes into a containment within ourselves, and we lock it up and we don't release it. So I really want to understand why we feel as adults that we need to do that.
So, you know, the word that I would use for this is about authenticity.
Yes.
Is about being authentic. Okay. And the analogy I use when we go, this is part of the joy of my job and my work, Savia, is people are already, from listening to this, are starting to understand and go, hang on, I thought shaking and trembling was bad. Oh, it's actually good. All right.
Exactly.
Now, if we inhibit it, I describe that as it's like blocking the emergency exit. You know, you've got the normal door when you're calm and relaxed and you can breathe and relax and calm yourself down, you just go in and out the front door. But when there's something emergency or, you know, overwhelmingly like stressful or traumatic, the body's got this emergency exit. And when we stop the tremoring and we don't let it happen, it's like locking the emergency exit. That's the story of my life. Was as a young child, and then when I was at boarding school, it wasn't until 30 years later, and I was doing this work, and I started to understand that I lived in complete hypervigilant freeze mode for 4 years at boarding school. I never talked to anyone about it. I never showed, because I was terrified that I was going to get humiliated. You know, I had a few experiences of group public shame and humiliation. But what was more damaging to me was that I was then living in this completely contained, frozen space. I didn't even know that I was that, stressed. I never spoke to anyone about it. So it's that containment that almost had more negative impact than the few of the traumatic sort of social traumas that I experienced. The way I then make sense of that is that pattern of holding tension in the body sinks into the nervous system in the same way that something like balance does. So think about this. When you're a young child, you don't know how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
And then you learn, and your system learns how to balance and not fall off the bike. And then all of a sudden, you know how to balance on a bike and you can ride a bike. Now, I like to say this. If I ever put you on a bike, I'd say, could you please turn off your automatic balancing? You'd be like, I can't turn off my balance. I mean, I could make myself fall over, but could you unwind what's been learnt into your system? The reason I'm saying this is because if we've got a lifetime of learning that's been holding this shake in because when I'm a child, it's dangerous. Or if I'm at boarding school, if I shake, I'm going to get humiliated for being weak or whatever. Or if I'm going to look like I'm traumatized as a first responder. When we hold this in, it becomes part of the nature of our system.
Yeah.
The beauty, though, so that consciously we can't say, I'm going to make my body shake more, because we're not making it happen, we're allowing it. The more people practice the TRE process, the more their body starts to shake and tremble and reawaken. And this is part of the real joy. It's not just about shaking to let go of the past and to let go of the tension. But as our body starts to come alive, as it starts to move and pulsate with aliveness, we start to get more connected to our physical body. And Candace Pert, the woman who wrote the great, the paradigm-changing book Molecules of Emotion, about all the chemicals associated with emotion, her follow-up was called Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind. So we tend to think, oh, my subconscious is like some other ethereal part that no physical structure doesn't exist, but it's our physical body. The reason I'm saying this is one of the joys of doing this spontaneous trembling and using it is it's not just about going, I'm letting go of some stress. It's going, I'm getting more connected to me, to who I am on a physical level, and getting connected to the deeper sense of who I am as a human. So another model of looking at this shaking and trembling, Savia, relevant to this, is that when mammals hibernate and their body shuts right down and they hibernate because they're got to survive and minimize their energy input, the way the body comes back to life is it starts to spontaneously twitch and tremble and shake before the animal is even consciously woken up again. Why this is relevant is because this shaking is not just about letting go of something, tension, trauma from the past. It's also about reawakening our human organism and our body, our nervous system, our somatic system. And as these parts of ourselves that have been frozen and not moving for so long start to move, we literally get more connected to ourselves. Now, sometimes we become aware, like my journey was, when all those parts of me that were containing and freezing all my stress and anxiety, as those parts start to soften and relax, we become more attuned to them. So part of my journey was going, oh my God, I can feel how anxious I am now. It makes complete sense as we're coming out of the freeze response. I'm getting much more embodied and grounded in the reality of who I am. So I can actually now learn how to mature and, learn how to be more calm. But it's a journey that we go through. So this is where, as our physical structure starts to move more, we feel ourselves more. As we feel ourselves more, we become more of ourselves. And that's not just physically. We start to get more connected to who we are, what our values are, what we like, what we don't like, our capacity to let go of things and choose things or move in direction, to be authentic, to express when we're scared or vulnerable, to authentically and lovingly express if we're not happy in our boundaries. All of these things are founded in this sense of being embodied, deeply embodied in our human organism. And this is where it can be so enlivening. It's about coming alive, becoming more of who we are. So that's why, for me, it was like this whole journey has been, who am I? What am I here? Why am I here? What do I want to do? And the more we get connected to that, the better life becomes, because there's value and purpose, and there's a much greater sense of who I am, both in my strengths and my weaknesses, and getting to a point of more comfort and acceptability and like, right, this is who I am. What can I do with this? How can I be of value and service and, live the best possible life I can, given who I am and following my own true, authentic path?
See, I think that's a nice way to ask you my next question, which is, if there is anything in this beautiful conversation that we've had that you would like people to take away from them, or just understand or just want to pass on to someone else, what would you tell them, and what information would you give them to take away with them?
Yeah. Look, the summary really is this, that this spontaneous shaking response, different to, we can have pathological, if you've had Parkinson's or MS, you can have shaking and tremoring, which is associated with illness or, dysfunction and that. But this impulse that we have inside us, my dream, Savia, is that at some point, every single person on the planet knows that this natural spontaneous movement response is a key part of our humanity that connects us as humans, regardless of race or gender or belief systems, and that it is there to help evolve and grow us as humans.
I like that.
One other element, this is probably something else I'm expanding, but another thing we haven't touched on yet is that every single one of us, our bodies shake and tremble and spontaneously move for 9 months in utero. This is a key thing. We didn't know this until we were able to have ultrasounds and we could see babies, or MRIs. And so from the very early phases, before mothers are saying, oh, look, the baby's awake, I can feel it kicking. Again, think the baby doesn't have a conscious mind to kick. It's not consciously kicking. The body is moving itself.
Yes.
The reason I just want to add this in is because this spontaneous movement, let's call it life force energy, let's call it kundalini, let's call it whatever you want to call it, myoclonic twitches, it gets called in the Western model, which is like little muscle tissue twitching. This is a foundational process that every single one of us goes through for 9 months in utero. This is a movement response that helps us become human.
Yes.
So if there was one thing I could do, if I could click my fingers before I die, would be that every single person on the planet, every child especially, knows that this is a natural positive thing, so that they don't suppress it, so that they don't trap themselves and contain themselves individually or culturally or medically and suppress and inhibit this life force that wants to flow through them and bring us all alive.
Yeah.
That's
I like it.
That's kind of the thing. And the pathway to that, I always say, was whether it's TRE or some other modality, like, it's wonderful to sit here and think about this. And most people will feel a sense of, wow, there's some hope that I might be able to release my trauma. There's some hope that I might be able to feel more alive. And that's all great as an intellectual process. The critical piece is that we physically experience this shaking and trembling in our body, no matter what mechanism or method you use, because up until then, it's a lovely pie in the sky theory. But what's important is once people re-experience it in their body, they have this technique for life. It's like it's reawoken. It's like the emergency exit is open. It's like the garden is free to grow and evolve. So I'm getting carried away, and I don't know if I've summed that up in a particular method, but it's both my greatest frustration that all of us in the TRE community in more than 80 countries around the world, we are constantly fighting against the medical model which tells everyone shaking is pathology, it's a symptom of anxiety and post-traumatic stress. Constantly fighting against the Western model that says shaking and trembling is part of anxiety, it's a panic attack, it's shock, it's trauma, rather than people recognizing, yes, it happens after those events, but it's something here to help us heal and grow and evolve and become more of who we are, become more ourselves. And from that place, we then start to relate differently to ourselves, to our body, to other people. Relationships improve. Our relationship with the earth improves. When we're a little bit more whole and healed, there's more space for the natural positivity and peace in our lives and better relationships. All right, I'm on a complete rant now. Let me stop, and you can ask me more questions, or you can redirect me. In summary, it's like I just want everyone find a way to experience this shaking That's why I say my online course at trecourse.com is one of the simplest, easiest, most cost-efficient ways to learn it. But the important thing is that we experience it. So it's not just words, that you know that if your body starts to shake after an accident, you feel 100% comfortable to let it do its thing. You know that you can deliberately use this resource and this shaking reflex inside you to help you heal, let go of the past, and to help you grow and become more of yourself.
See, I have so many more questions. I think we're going to have to do a part 2, to be fair. So before, I know you've already kindly said your website to everyone, but I would love, because I've had such an experience talking to you about this, being educated and hearing your wisdom about everything to do with this. I would love for everyone who is listening, and even for them to pass it on to other people. Where can we find you, Richmond? Where can we find more about what you do? Where can people be able to contact you if they want to experience a conversation with you, or just to understand your process of what you do? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so the best starting point, the easiest place to go is to the website at www.trecourse.com.
Yes.
There's some free videos and information at the start of that course, and then that will then take you into the guided process. And if you don't feel safe to do it on your own, or you've got a history of major trauma or mental health or physical conditions, it will then link you off to find TRE providers around the world as well. And if there's listeners who are working in the therapy field, so there's training in TRE globally where you can learn to teach this as part of a practice, or even just learn to teach family and friends. But I also do specific training for movement, exercise, and body-based practitioners. I have a 12-week clinical, I call it a clinical TRE course. But the starting point is just go to that www.trecourse.com, and then whatever information, you'll be able to find your way onwards from there. And I always like to point out to people, Savia, that the whole focus of me, and this was modeled to me by David Berceli, the TRE founder, is that I'm not trying to get people to connect with me. Right?
Yes,
That's what a lot of business and a lot of therapy and a lot of that is about. Oh, you got to come and see me. And David Berceli, his whole view around TRE, his whole passion about bringing this to the world in this way, and this is true for me as well, is yes, I'm very happy for people to come and learn through my course, and there are lots of things I can help educate and support people, but ultimately I'm wanting people to connect with their own self and their own body through me. So I always like to say I'm not really that important. The information at the trecourse.com is really valuable, but ultimately it's about people connecting with themselves and connecting with their own communities, rather than trying to, going, I want to be associated with Richmond per se. That said, there's lots of, I've got lots of great information and education, and probably by the time this podcast comes out, just over the end of last year, I've created an advanced online course. This one's got 12 guided sessions, which will help people significantly deepen their tremoring process, both in understanding it and how their body moves. But again, that's down the track for people who want to do more and deepen more. Again, that's going to be online and very cost effective. But the starting point is just go to trecourse.com, have the experience, start to explore this in your own body, and then go from there.
Richmond, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Ask People podcast, for showing your wisdom, your enthusiasm, and your passion. Honestly, for what you do, it's absolutely phenomenal, and it's always really nice to see people who want to give a service, but give a service in a way that it's passionate to them, but also make people understand that there are ways that can help them. Because I wanted to go down and even talk about medical things and so on and so forth, and I know we'll be there into the early hours, but I definitely am going to do a part 2 with you. Brilliant. Because there's so much more that I know me and you can talk about and share with people. So from me to you, from the abundance of my heart completely, I want to say thank you so much for taking your time to come on the Ask People podcast and share your wisdom. I appreciate you very much. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Savia, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to, through you, to be able to speak to all the people who are listening to this now. So great, super grateful for that opportunity, and I hope that my enthusiasm doesn't, put people off or get people carried away. Again, at the end of the day, don't worry about me or who I am or how I am. The important thing is that this hopefully will help people, go inwards and get connected to this amazing resource that's inside every one of us, basically our life force, for want of a better word, or I like to use the term the organic wisdom of the body, to keep it scientific and not too woo-woo. But really it's about connecting to who we are, our essence, that exists while we're asleep, before we're thinking people. So anyway, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to get this information out to people who will benefit from it.
You are more than welcome. And I say, guys, I want to thank you so much for listening to the Us People podcast. And please remember, you can subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or any other platform that you prefer listening to. You can also go to the Savia Rocks website, or also the Us People podcast website, and listen to any episode of the Us People podcast that you feel resonates with you. I just want to say thank you again for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and as always, please continue to be kind to one another. Take care.
I'ma get deeper, tables are turning, world in reverse, political burning. Where is the love? Where is the hope? Where is the faith inside? It's been misplaced, power being misguided, manipulation used for both sides, unjustified violence. You living it up in your kingdom, where you're using the misguided that wants to do you.
The shaking response, like in talking about the gap between positivity and negativity, because as our system is, negatively biased, but I also think there's a big element around people not feeling alive. And so often when we focus on stress and negative things, it brings us alive in a way that a lot of our lives and our culture doesn't. And that's part of the thing around the shaking and the vibrating. It's not just about releasing stress, but it's also about awakening aliveness in the body, so that we become, when our system is more regulated, we naturally become more positive.
How do you breathe and how do you feel? I guess it's a lie you've been telling yourself. Get deeper, tables are turning, world in reverse, political burning. Jesus said, sins of your fathers, ripping through time, we living and breathing it. How could I breathe when I see people dying on both sides? We need to do better, shell shock, yeah, imagine that. Powers pretending they don't even have blood on their hands. Playing on both sides, you know what you did. Change the status quo, sins of your fathers, ripping through time, we living it, breathing it. Kings and queens, mass destruction, digging mass graves, driven by the greed. You don't really care, devil smile in my face. Your hidden agenda ain't really about peace, your hidden agenda ain't really about love. How do you breathe and how do you sleep? I guess it's a lie you've been telling yourself. The lies we see through the darkness and the blurry lines. I'm about to dive in deep, the wheels are spinning, globes in rewind, political ablaze. Where's compassion? Where's the love?